Okay, can everybody hear me now? Okay, great. So this is the special meeting of the MSAD 49 Board of School Directors. We'll have the roll call. Booten? Here. Did you unmute, Danielle?
Here.
Boyden here. Caverly? Absent. Davis Folsom?
Here.
Dumont?
Here.
Flood? Absent. Hussey?
Here.
Kinley?
Present.
Kugelmeyer?
Here.
Lambert?
Here.
White?
Here.
Williams? White?
Here.
7, 8, 9, 10. Oh, Rachel, we have a new board member from Fairfield. She's not on the list. That's why I didn't have enough people. Rachel Hashi is taking the seat that was vacated by Judy. So, Rachel?
Present.
Thank you. All right.
Welcome, Rachel, virtually. You're there in person, the rest of us are like,
Yes, thank you very much.
All right, we'll have the Pledge of Allegiance. Okay. So I would entertain a motion to accept the minutes of the June 18th, 2020 board meeting.
So moved.
Second.
Moved by Roy and seconded by Katrina. Any discussion? Seeing none, it's been moved by Roy and seconded by Katrina to accept the minutes of the June 18th, 2020 board meeting. Booten?
yes.
Boyden, yes. Davis Folsom?
Yes.
Dumont?
Yes.
Hussey?
Yes.
Kinley?
Yes.
Kugelmeyer?
Abstain.
Hashi?
Abstain.
Lambert?
Abstain.
White?
Yes.
Williams?
Yes.
Okay, so that passes 803. This is the point where we would take any citizen input. The telephone line has been open. John, do we have anybody on the phone? No. Okay. So now we will go to old business, which is an update on the district's reopening plan. This is Hersom.
Thank you. First, I just wanted to update, ensure that our
Roberta,
child.
could you speak a little louder?
Sure. try.
Yeah, get right in that mic because you're sounding far away.
I'm far away from you, Kara, but yeah.
You may want to get farther.
Okay. I just wanted to open by saying I want families and students and staff to know that as we develop our plan for fall 2020, that the health and safety of all are foremost on our minds as we develop scenarios for educating our students. And I especially want to thank the families who responded to the survey we put out and who took the time to share their thoughts, concerns, expectations, fears and hopes for the upcoming school year. That was very helpful, and our team is going to review those comments and the specific responses to the reopening of our school and some of the considerations that we need to mull over as we develop our response plans in the 3 scenarios that the DOE has laid out for us. Again, I thank you, and I want to ensure you and try to build confidence that we are going to do our best to bring everyone back as soon as we're able to. We all understand that an in-person education for our students is what we are designed to deliver. And I believe students, families, our staff especially, is very much looking forward to that. And as soon as it can happen, the better. But given that, the CDC and the main DOE are continuing to provide guidelines and will guide the process and the decision making. And right now, there are 3 options that we have been charged with building a plan around. And one is for a full in-person return of students to school with health and safety guidelines in place. And the state has laid out perhaps a green designation for that, coded green, yellow, red, and some people may have heard of that. And that would really depend on cases of positive COVID-19 and the trends in our area right now. It is laid out by county, and of course, MSAD 49 straddles 2 counties, Kennebec and Somerset. And the second option, is a partial return or a hybrid, which may include returning students in person in smaller groups. And the idea behind that is that if we are unable to meet social distancing requirements, and given we have very finite fixed spaces, physical spaces in our buildings, and each of our buildings is different, but there's just so much square footage and real estate in a classroom. And we must consider allowing for that distancing as it's currently in the guidelines of 6 feet. I think most of us understand that and hear it. And there are all other components of protective equipment, but how many children can be in a space at a time for in-person learning? And there are lots of scenarios and configurations and how we make that work logistically. From alternating days to partial days are a couple of examples. But the goal would be smaller in-person groups at a time. And we'll look at what works best for our community and really for our own capacity for facility and transportation, as I addressed in the communication that I put out to families on July 7th. Those are very real concerns and considerations, and a place that we need to work from as we make our plans. And of course, the last scenario would be the remote, and that students are not present, they are learning from a remote platform. And again, I thank you to the families who have provided feedback. We know that if we are in that situation, whether it be at the opening of school or at some point during the school year, we need to deliver a program in that platform that is rigorous and challenging and is puts children in a position where they're fully accessing our curriculum and programming. So those are the options right now that are in consideration. So I wanted to talk to the board a bit about what we have been doing, and maybe a timeline of what's happened since school closed. We closed for students on June 5th, and we spent the following week with staff reviewing and training for a remote platform, including some universal screener to assess gaps in learning. So we're able to do that upon return, whether we're in person or not. I, with Scott Washburn and our building principals, spent the portion of June meeting with administrators, but going through buildings again and again and again, the physical plant and the challenge of keeping people, whether it be children, students, or staff, at a safe enough distance to be in person and return to the school buildings. That fed into and informed the development of our ESSER application. The district was awarded $690,000 based on a formula related to our Title I. And about $20,000 of that would be dedicated to our non-public. In this case, in our school district, it's Glen Stratton Learning Center on the Goodwill Hinckley campus as a recipient for equitable services. And so from there, Scott and Tara Thompson and myself and Patricia Watts, our assistant superintendent, worked on the development of that application that has many components, a large portion relating to modifications in the physical plant and the training that will need to take place to educate our families, our staff, and our students about new protocols and a new way when we do return of even moving around our buildings. And again, health and safety at the forefront of what we needed to do and what identifying the resources we need. And of course, the PPE was a consideration. And yes, the state is procuring that for all SAUs. But we have ordered our own supply, including shields and masks and gloves and all the pieces that go with that. The idea of just sanitization and cleaning, not just the spaces, but people washing their hands. And we know that some very simple steps, when properly followed, really reduce the risk of contracting and transmitting the illness. So those are just some of the things that we had in mind as we were trying to prepare the facility. Of course, all the signage that needs to be displayed, laid down, prepping the building. One of the other considerations was for identifying an isolation space should a student, a child present with symptoms or a symptom even, depending on what that symptom is, of possible COVID infection. And there are very stringent protocols that need to be followed to ensure that. So we worked back from these primary concerns for health and safety, physical plant, and how are we going to address illness in the building. Also, as part of that grant, we dedicated some funds to pay staff and critical personnel and our nursing staff and our counselors so they could prepare and work out plans and protocols for that safety. We know that some of the training and the pre-teaching, if you will, is going to have to be delivered virtually, and taking the time to put those pieces together. For example, once we get the signage laid out in the buildings, to bring camera through and create a virtual tour and talk about what the environment is going to look like before we actually bring people in, and particularly children, so they know what to expect. And also, one of the things that is going to occur when we do reopen our buildings is that we are going to have to reduce the traffic in the buildings. And that includes visitors, and families. Access to the buildings will be, so we can reduce the number of personnel in the space, people, human beings in the space in any given day, is finding a way for our parents to access their children, pick them up, drop them off, speak directly and in person with personnel if they need to, but in a way that regulates how far in traffic goes to our buildings, because that is a concern when it comes to the transmission of the illness. And to reduce that will allow us to, when we do open, stay open as long as possible for factors that we can control versus the things that will be outside of our control. Did I just drop from the meeting? No. Okay. So those were our immediate concerns. In addition to that, the consideration of transporting children. That is why one of the survey questions, so our survey questions back to families and working from potentially who intends to send their children to school. Should we be open, and who does not, regardless of maybe the safeguards that we have in place with their discomfort with that, and who will be accessing students programming remotely provided by the district or otherwise. And the other piece is transporting children to school. As you know, we have a fleet with a capacity that forces us to have 2 bus runs. We don't have a large enough fleet, and we don't have enough drivers to do that. And as long as I can remember, there have been 2 bus runs in this school district. We've recently altered the secondary run and moved up the start time for different considerations in the start of an adolescent school day. That decision was made a few years back. And the logistics of those 2 bus runs without impacting the start time of the elementary day were complex and challenging, but Scott achieved that. And now we are thinking, as we are considering a reduction of students in a building, that perhaps on any given day we can't bring the whole population in. So how do we do that logistically? And the considerations in an elementary bus run when we're running in town to the in-town schoolhouse are very different than considerations when we were doing the secondary run. In an elementary setting, students are assigned to say a second grade teacher for the day, with the exception of specials, and they stay in place, and it's easier to keep those children in place and reduce exposure among children and adults. In the secondary scheme, where teachers are content certified and courses are, course sections are generated by those teacher endorsements, and children move around through the day, it's a bit of a different matter. And teachers are very specifically trained in a particular content area. So through grade 8, 7 and 8, students access their schedule, puts them through the paces of our entire program. There aren't electives. In the high school, it is a very different logistical dynamic where sections of classes are not identified by a particular grade level. It's students who have registered for their courses and who have built their own schedules within the programming requirements of our 4-year program in our high schools. So it is not as easily separated out by a particular population or town, but really we're thinking of how we can get a portion of the students in the building and utilize our staff, our teaching staff, in a way that is most productive. So there are many concerns, and certainly It's transportation is among them. Given that, I wanted to talk a little bit about the timeline or the sequence of events that are bringing us to today. And I touched on the development of the ESSER grant, the planning needs assessment. It took an incredible amount of time. And finally, we're able to file the application on July 1st. It was submitted and was approved by the DOE on July 10th. And that's very important. Some school districts have delayed the filing of that. We are not in a position financially where we can expend the funds that we need to make the physical modifications, just those alone in the buildings, without the without it being subsidized by this grant. So it was important, and we needed it approved so we can start invoicing and being reimbursed within at least a 30-day cycle. Because as you heard, it's a significant amount of money, and we've accounted for all of it just in the pieces that I've mentioned. On July 7th, as I said, we surveyed families and updated families on where we're at. There will be a letter that I will send. It's in a draft form to teachers and educational technicians in the upcoming week, early next week, that essentially asks the same question of will there be a barrier, a medical barrier or other to your return to school? Do you expect to not be able to return to in-person instruction? And the district will need to have a response to that, and potentially make accommodations for that staff member. The Families First Coronavirus Act stipulates about 6 reasons that are protected for return, and it's a question of employment. So back to the ESSER grant, part of what we accounted for is a situation in which we may need to have proctors in a place where students are physically present, but a staff member is not. And I don't expect we'll encounter many of those situations, but just there is a cost associated with at least the supervision of children in a space, regardless if instruction is provided remotely or not. So some considerations there. July 10th, we convened a meeting, we being administrators and nurses. The nurses had worked to develop a list of recommendations and concerns by school. They worked very closely, some with their administrators. And this had stemmed from earlier, before our closure. We convened, guess you would call them transition meetings, or it's more along the structure of the collaborative planning that the DOE calls it. But moving forward toward the reintegration, what are our needs and concerns? So we focused on health needs, as our nurses have shared with us. And again, a part of that was carving out that physical space in proximity to the nurse's office should a child present with symptoms. And there will be a lag of time depending on a parent's availability to pick a child up and leave the building and sanitizing this space, disinfecting it all over again. But between identifying a child with symptoms and the child leaving the building, the nurse will be supervising that child, but there'll still be some other screening and services that the school nurse routinely provides to students, dispensing medications, say. that will still need to continue. And we need personnel for that and a plan for that. So those are some of the things we talked about on July 10th. Fortunately, Deanna Turlo is part of, I believe, a statewide school nurses organization and on a planning group that's generating a document that's not yet been finalized, but she will share that with us soon at the time in the forthcoming weeks. I look forward to seeing that, and I hope it's in our hand before we meet with our collaborative team. On July 13th, the Maine DOE released some information, the updated framework. And in that context, and this is why it's that we began with health and safety, physical plant, transportation, and we're working on, I've asked the principals to develop in their building, given their physical space, the square footage, and their schedules, their staff schedules, their student schedules, how can we develop a hybrid model of a partial return or return for some. And the DOE mentioned in that communication to superintendents that the framework will likely continue to evolve in the next few weeks as we synthesize additional guidelines and information, and we will notify you when there are substantial updates. So I am thinking it's in keeping with our own timeline here within the next few weeks, which brings us to July 27th. And there's a fine line as we are creating toward the opening of school and all the changes that are needing to occur physically in the building before we can reopen, but also working from the most current CDC guidelines in our Department of Education. As though it's a dynamic document, I understand, and ever evolving, but we need to, fix a point and say we're building our plan around this so we can communicate that to families. And I know that families are waiting. I also meet with superintendent groups in our local group of superintendents, and generally everyone is laying out those 3 general scenarios, but not knowing the specifics of how we're going to go forward is, I'm just hoping by the week of the 27th, we'll have more solidified information. For example, the American Pediatrics Association, that organization, the recommendation is 3 to 6 feet of social distancing. Well, 3 feet matters hugely. Again, back to that fixed real estate in a classroom. And if we're looking, could we possibly bring, if the guidance is 3 feet finally from CDC, we're in a much better position to bring more children back into our buildings, or perhaps all of them. If we remove some of the other peripheral pieces in a room and we can possibly get them apart, that would be the goal. So that matters greatly. Transportation, right now it's a child per seat on a bus, with the exception of family members who may sit together. That matters hugely on how many we can even bring into a space at a time. The idea that we have 2 runs as it is, and the geography of our district is quite large. Again, that doesn't matter for the in-town schools, elementaries, but it matters when we're moving children from Albion to the junior high or the senior high. So those little pieces make a big difference in our capacity. And I would very much like to tell parents that we can return. In the comments I've read, and I know these things. These are things that are in the governor's mind, and just the economics, our main economy, parents' ability to return to work as they're needed to, and knowing that their children are here with us during the work day, is a help, and let alone the foundation of our work is, the education of those children. But schools also serve many other purposes, and those are all things in our mind. The DOE is offering in their framework discussion for SAU, school administrative units, developing flexible plans for instruction for superintendents and designees, and I believe we can have 2 people per SAU in addition to a superintendent. So those sessions are scheduled for Tuesday, July 21st and Wednesday, July 22nd. So I'm very much interested in hearing from our commissioner and her staff on plans. The Tuesday session includes plans and maybe some models for hybrid return, and some expectations and safeguards and decision-making guidance. And on Wednesday, it seems that is more directed for people in the unit that are involved with transportation, nutrition, facilities, HR, business managers. So I very much look forward to those 2 sessions coming up next week. And that would bring us to ongoing work next week through July 28th. And I had mentioned this to our nurse, but again, back to the SRF grant, we have funds in place for nurses to do some of this work, pay them the stipend work, because we have the funds for that through this grant, and for our school counselors to work. So in the DOE framework, there are 3 components, one being health and safety, and the other involves the social and emotional well-being, the mental health of our students, and then academic programming, and also in the framework our expectations, and particularly some expectations in the remote platform. But that is not that we would compel this staff to do this work, but I am sure that we have staff very interested in assisting us with the development of the plan and the resources. It'll be about protocols, our training for staff, and resources for students and families that I am going to ask nurses and counselors to work on. July 27 and 28. I've asked principals to submit to me an outline of a hybrid plan for their buildings, just an outline based on what's possible logistically, and all the other components that need to be in place once we have people physically present, and they are vast. I encourage everyone to review the framework for returning to classroom instruction on the DOE site. And on the 27th and 28th, I'm going to ask principals to facilitate school-based collaborative planning meetings and conversations around the unique needs of individual schools. For example, Scott Washburn and I we returned to the Fairfield primary building and looking at how we're going to dedicate those spaces. That is a building in which we have very young children entering. We have 3-year-olds accessing programming in that building. And how are we going to modify the routine of bringing their children in and picking them up in a way that will allow us to open our buildings and regulate and try to mitigate as much as we can the spread of illness. On July 29th, we are going to convene a collaborative planning team, and that'll consist of transportation reps, food services, childcare, special education, technology, nurses, leaders from our district employee associations, board members, and administrators. And I it's about a group of 20 right now. That'll need to be a virtual meeting, but we will have some semblance of portions of the plan in place. Of course, it'll be the team that is going to have some input and decide how we're going to move forward. And that committee will convene weekly until we have something that we're going to be able to put forth. I would also suggest, we can talk about this later, maybe special board meetings. I know that you were meeting tonight, and we had planned, because we had our budget referendum on Tuesday. And thank you to the public for your support of our educational programs, our students. And I, as any of our employees here, take the charge of this work very seriously, and hoping to build the confidence of the public in the program we offer. But I know that this is a very uncertain time, and that's uncertain, unprecedented. And I know that it causes anxiety and frustration in families, and we will do our best to serve our children in the way that we were meant to here. So the 29th will be the beginning of the hybrid logistics. I mean, it's pretty clear if we're all returned in social distancing, and that's okay. And of course, the remote is a scenario that we know may come up over the year, but it's the hybrid that we'll focus on. And hopefully we'll have a framework from the DOE with the updates that they suggest are coming in the July 13th communication. I know that, and I've received questions from community and board members about some of the finer details in our return from contact tracing and the protocols in place. And again, the CDC will regulate a lot of that. Mask wearing is another question. Sanitizing, hand washing, hygiene.
Roberta,
Yep.
when you say the CDC, you're talking about Maine CDC.
Yes.
Okay, I just want to be clear, because Dr. Shaw did actually give in his conference today. I mean, there was a lot of questions up from the press on schools, and he alluded to quite a few things. It was good.
So, and again, I will share with the committee and any board member wish to see, I mean, the results of the survey, but without associating comments to a particular individual or anything that would be identifiable. I think it would be helpful for the board to understand, the committee to understand the concerns of this community and the concerns within this community, while some are very similar to local communities, state, national. Some of them are very unique to us. And I think as we move forward in crafting our plan, finalizing it, putting it forth, that the board understands what those concerns are as they've been communicated. There. Before we move on with the rest of my update, and I do apologize for being long-winded. I'm trying to fill you in on what we've been doing and where we're at. I wanted to ask David Packard, our athletic director, to give us an update on co-curricular plans, because I've also received questions about that. David, have you joined us?
Yeah, I'm here.
Okay.
Right now, we are still waiting, like everybody else is, for a final decision from the state and from the MPA about what sports will look like. There's been plans introduced that would have these sports that they deem safest for kids to participate in, to be played in the fall, and then making up the other sports in the spring. So we kind of switch the fall and the spring seasons. There was talk of changing schedules to have only local schools play each other to eliminate as much travel as possible. But again, I've heard that possibly next week they might have an answer, and maybe it'll be the first week of August when they have an answer, and we're just in a hurry up and wait situation right now with those things.
And Roberta, if I'm clear too, we haven't moved, and I forget the phases, so somebody feel free to jump in, but we're still in the phase where public gatherings are restricted to 50.
Yes.
So until the governor actually moves us into, like, we can't even get back in person, right? Let alone do anything until we move into another phase anyway. So that seems, like we're going to be depending and waiting on that. And I suspect, I'm just wondering, given everything that's happened across the country now, how eager we're going to be to move to the to the next phase. Certainly based upon Dr. Shaw's comments today, it got me thinking about that.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And certainly that's the prevailing voice, again, back to health and safety. The piece of athletics, whether those contests happen, and the MPA has governance over the structure of say a playoff system and titles. There are activities that usually occur on our campus in the summer that aren't associated with a stipend position, but coaches offer conditioning and training, and we don't have our coaches on campus using our facilities. Now, it might be that children come onto our campus and other adults, and we address that as we see it, but there is no organized activity in person facilitated by an employee of our school district on campus.
Sorry. So Roberta, I'm hearing this correctly, that the MSAD 49 is not conducting any type of sport activity right now.
No, there is no sport in the summer, and no personnel is facilitating that. Coaches were given the opportunity. See, what the MPA regulates is for the fall sports, there has to be a hands-off period where there's no contact between, children involved in activities all summer long, whether it's AAU athletics or whatever. But it's that 2-week hands-off period was meant to give students a respite from the pressure of needing to participate and keep up. The MPA has moved that hands-off season period to front load. Like right now, I think that's over with. I don't think there's an expectation that sports, especially high contact sports, we're looking at, say, soccer and football maybe, where there's a greater chance of spread, that those are going to occur given our current situation. I do know that groups of students have come onto our campus since our closure, actually, since the snow left us, and have been on our fields and have been asked to go elsewhere. And we can't control what people do off campus, just like we have people on our playgrounds. But I guess what I'm saying is, I don't know that kids don't come on here occasionally, but there is no employee out there working with children. on our campuses. Does that answer you, Katrina? Like there, like summer basketball usually happens for girls and boys, and they compete probably with local teams usually, and they have a schedule. I mean, it's not anything, the coach volunteers for that and organizes it in a way. Those things aren't happening for MSAD 49 programming. I do know that locally, and again, depending on the school system, some of the facilities aren't owned by the school district. They're owned by the towns, the cities. I know that in Augusta, some of these activities are happening and some of our kids are participating in it, but it's not an MSAD 49 Lawrence sponsored event. They're accessing programming elsewhere.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I just, I've had a lot of questions about it, so I
Yeah.
just wanted to have true clarification that
Yes,
I have the right answer. Thank you.
that is what's happening. Yep.
I also, oh, sorry, go ahead, Ray.
No, go ahead. I'm sorry.
No, Ray had her hand up first.
So I've had questions too asked by various people. Are students, and understand coaches are not to be on school grounds. So are students allowed to be on the fields?
They have been, no, well, we wouldn't allow them to convene because they're not supervised. But people do walk onto our campus. And when we see that, we being any of the personnel, they're asked to leave. And that's my understanding. Whether they're out there right now, if you look out that window, I don't know. But if we see them, we ask them to leave the campus.
Because I think that's something we need to be very careful about, that there might be groups out there and, other athletes might see that and say, well, why can't we be out there? And we just need to make sure everybody's following what the guidelines we have set in place.
Yeah.
To keep everybody happy and getting along with each other.
Well, and it's what we've asked. We've closed our facilities.
Right.
We closed them in March, and they remain closed.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, not only that, but the, colleges who have brought their sports teams back together for just practices, forget about competition, as well as professionals are basically like, oh yeah, right, we're all catching it. So I think kind of reminding people that, it's obviously we're in a situation nobody wants to be in. And that certainly, I'm just saying like the NESCAC schools are all, are just basically like, I don't think so, because, or if it's going to happen, it's going to be like yoga for everybody. It's just like getting a physical group of people together where typically the transmission of disease is really high in general in a cohort like that. It just tends to be high in general. So it seems like, until it gets into a better position, that it's just, I'd be very surprised if we're able to offer anything in any traditional way for a while.
It seems that's the case, and again, to the disappointment of a lot of students, but we'll cross that bridge. And again, the co-curricular, right now we're trying to just address the core part of our programming and our main mission. And but I do know that all sorts of programming is important to students here. In fact, I've been receiving communication from Renee Meisner and Kaylee Smith about guidance on, say, vocal music programs and singing, a vocals program, or our choral program, and particularly wind instruments, and the rate of spread in those environments when kids are participating in those activities. It's not just athletics. There are lots of activities that schools offer to students There are very important, and they could be very central to their program. And depending on the physical interplay and what happens and needs to happen to participate fully, this virus is doing something different to Renee Meisner's chorus class than it's doing to maybe a 7th grade ELA class. I don't know, but the challenges are greater for some of our programming. So, and I do thank those staff members who are updating us, but and there are layers of guidance that affects more deeply sometimes the programming that we offer. So thank you, David. And I'd also want to ask, though I've touched on most of it, food services. Oh, I'm sorry.
Oh, Roberta, I have a quick question. Now, if students in the town as a whole aren't supposed to be on the property to do sports or even just utilize the field, we want the kids to be able to go out and get exercise and do things together as a family. And I mean, in a gray area, it is a taxpayer funded. So where does that line get drawn?
That is a great question. And it is, when I say school sponsored, I think the questions that we heard from Ray and maybe Katrina relate to the sports teams or last year's whatever group it was reforming and trying to operate themselves without the supervision of an adult versus children supervised by family members. There are liabilities. We close the campus, and to have students come on that campus unsupervised, organizing their own events creates some liability. But you're right. In fact, we've had members of the public call the business office, call the superintendent. Is it okay to use the track, walk around? Of course, but I think that's not an assumption of liability on the school's part, if that helps. But when I am passing by Fairfield Primary School and I see teenagers on the playground hanging out, that's another matter that's addressed in a different way.
Okay, nope, that sounds great. Thank you.
But we're not advocating that the public come in mass and use the sports facilities. I want to be clear, because that's not what you're saying. And
No.
I think that opens up a legality issue for us, because while we are public funded, ultimately the liability of the district lies with policies that we make. And we already have policies about the public coming on and using our facilities.
Mhm.
And so I think we need to be very careful about what we're saying here. And I would ask for clarification on that, because we could easily get in a situation where if we're not offering sports and then the message is like, oh, fine, come and bring your family, and there's an altercation on it because some people are not choosing to social distance or wear a mask when they can't social distance. Like, we don't want to get in that area is what I'm
No.
saying. We don't want to get in that area.
Of course not. But conversely, we have members of the public that I see daily, 2-3 times a day sometime, pass through our campus on their walking route. That's the question that we received. Can we walk through your campus? Can we walk around the track? Colby College has a track open, or
which actually the campus is closed to the public. So like, they're not allowing, like, they're just not at this moment, like, they may be letting some people use it, but the campus is closed to the public. So I don't think that's a good, I'm just saying, as someone who works there, I'm telling you, I know that. So
probably not a good
There's a
example to
difference
use.
between somebody who wants to walk through the property versus they want to come and use the track to exercise. And, you know, if there's going to be a mass amount of people who decide to do that, we're just not prepared to police that. And so I think we, you know, we need to think very carefully about that and maybe get guidance from outside counsel or the DOE or this, you know, CDC, whatever that is, because that's not, do you understand what I'm saying? So I think we should, I understand that, you know, people come and do that and we're not going to deny them access to walk through the campus. It's a little bit different than, let's invite the whole community to come in and, you know,
Well, I
use
think,
it without,
right.
yeah.
And I get the distinction, and we had considered posting signs. We are not able to lock some of our facility up to public access. And certainly as we see people gathering during the workday when staff are here, it's addressed. So we had talked about actually this spring, you know, posting signs up, and we can go ahead and do that if that's.
Well, I think we should get guidance about what it looks like. And like, I'm not opposed to if people want to come use the track and there's a lot of people that there's a sign up or there's a process or whatever. Do you get what I'm saying? Like,
I do.
If that's what it's going to, but I do think we need to get some guidance around what that looks like. Because it doesn't feel clear to me because we've never had to navigate anything like this before.
Right.
And so I certainly don't want to be a killjoy to people using this space, but I also don't want to get in a situation where I could easily see some sort of uncomfortable disagreement, altercation on the school grounds, you know, in the public, like the public using that space in a way that maybe we've never intended it. So I'm just, I think it would be good to get clarification. So it was very clear to the public about what the process would be. And I'm all for people getting as much exercise as they want. And maybe what Dave's going to be able to do if we're not going to have sports is offer a whole host of things online for, I mean, you know, like, I'm not sure, but you know, I'm just saying, like, that feels a little weird and fuzzy to me. And it'd be good if it wasn't fuzzy.
Right. I will follow up on that. I think posting signs is what the guidance or suggestion actually. And you know, it's distinctly different if it's a school sponsored activity and it's students organizing on their own even, but I understand, and I'll follow up on that. Scott, would you be willing to offer your update, please?
Sure. Can you hear me now? So transportation is definitely a big challenge for sure. Like Robert's looking at some different models, using our software to help with the logistics of student population. Going by current social distance guidelines, one person is basically, you know, we can fit 24 students on a bus. The original guidelines were one every other seat, which is like 13 students on a bus. And we don't the fleet or bus drivers to, you know, that wouldn't work for us here. So we're looking at possibly adding bus as one of the options. Basically, to follow those guidelines, we would have to add approximately 3 or 4 bus runs per bus in the morning and the afternoon, which would be very costly. Looking at an alternating schedule, possibly half the students one day and, you know, rotating that schedule. Moving pickup and drop off times is something we're looking at because we will have to sanitize in between bus runs where we have double bus runs. That presents a challenge for us. Basically, when students drop off here at the high school, junior high, they would have to sanitize the bus before they started picking up the elementary students, which is going to push their time back. So we're putting in some new protocols, getting ready for those for the fall, cleaning, disinfecting the bus and vans after each bus run or van run. Some PPE requirements for staff, and loading and unloading students is something that is being looked at. Maybe loading students from the back to the front for social distancing, which presents a problem. We always have our kindergarten students sit in the front of the bus. So if that's the first student you pick up, we'd have a kindergarten student sitting in the back of the bus, which isn't something we like to do. And every school bus, we're in the process of installing hand sanitizers on all of our school buses. So as students board the bus, they can sanitize their hands before they go sit down. We're just trying to think of every possible scenario to safely transport our students this fall. Keeping in mind the guidelines will change probably next week and the week after, so we will have to adapt to those guidelines as they change.
Thank you, Scott.
Can I ask a question about the ESSA grant? I know we received a set amount of money based on a formula. If we had not received a set amount of money, would you have had more expenses that could have been charged to a grant like that? Like, did you cap what you were planning to spend based on the amount of money that was available? That's okay. So I probably didn't ask it very clearly anyway. The ESSER grant was for a set of amount of money. So you developed a budget of our needs based on that amount of money. But if you were to develop a budget of our needs without recognizing what that cap was, are there expenses that the district could incur in order to meet health and safety guidelines that would be unfunded by a grant? Like, if there was more capacity in that grant, would you have more expenses that you could have included?
Yes.
I still don't feel like I'm asking that in a very clear way.
Yes, and that would include, as Scott has referenced, and I have, it's our bus fleet. There's the physical number of buses, but it's our capacity to drive them. It's finding enough people with a CDL willing to drive buses. There's a shortage. Teachers, substitutes, proctors that we're going to need, depending on something. There's not a lot of information that's very predictive of what a future need might be given an exposure in our building, or just personnel at large. People have work lives and private lives, and things happen where we're going to be in a situation potentially where we have children here, but we don't have adults to supervise them. So paying for people to do that work alone. I talked about the modifications of our building, where we're dealing with the entry point and parents bringing children in or picking them up. Where, say, Benton School, for example, that main office is in the heart of the building. You have to go deep into the building to access the main office. We won't be able to do that. So we're going to have personnel by that entrance monitoring that, regulating it. We have a sick student who presents with a fever. Consider this in an elementary school in particular. How many students in a given day, given a population of 600 students or who is going to present with a fever? And that will initiate a protocol. that will require more than the school nurse as an adult managing that. So great question. And that very much relates to our capacity to have our buildings open. Way back in February when we had influenza, we had a number of, it's the absenteeism rate, and it was at Fairfield Primary. We have younger children probably transmitting more readily than older ones. And we did make a report as we hit that threshold. And the CDC's guidance to me, to the district, is, well, whether you close the building or not really depends on the percentage of your staff who are ill and not able to be there. And that relates to our ability to just supervise children. So that is going to take manpower. And that costs money.
Thank you. No, that's okay. I just wanted to make sure that it was understood that while we are getting a substantial amount of money from a federal grant to support some of this, there are additional expenses that are still possible that are not being funded, and that will be something we figure out as we go along.
The sound from you guys in the room is really bad right now. I can't understand anything.
Lots of questions. Are there any other questions that people want to ask right now?
Jenny, I think someone's got to mute because we can't hear. It's
Okay,
way
I
too
just
echoey.
muted. Right now, let me see. Oh, Kara is unmuted.
You're also, it's
Okay,
the quality
right now
of,
I am the only one unmuted.
it's not the muting, it's the stream. You're all it's not a consistent signal right now for you.
It's our Wi-Fi.
Yeah, like you're frozen, Jenny. We're not seeing you move or anything.
I am moving.
Oh, I know you are. I'm just like, you're just frozen on the screen for us.
Okay.
Okay, we see you moving now.
You're on mute.
All right. And again, back to a great question. And that grant, it sounds like a significant amount of money, but when you're making physical plant modifications, just for example, tonight, some of the business on the agenda relates to the computation and declaration of votes. Well, that's been modified because they will be signed electronically, and we engage legal counsel to generate these documents so we get it right. There are just legal expenses that are the COVID-related issues that have come forth. But regardless, personnel, paying people to do this work has associated costs, and I don't know what we'll need, how many we'll need, and if they will be available to us.
Roberta, I want to thank you and obviously all the staff for the amazing, exceptional work that you guys have done. There's no roadmap for this. We're all figuring it out as we go along, and you and the entire staff have at least my undying admiration for going through this whole process and understanding that it's just going to be a learning process for everybody. And I think the challenges for us is why we want to strive for health and safety. I think everybody's realizing how challenging that's going to be. And we have so many things we haven't figured out. And so it'd be interesting in the DOE trainings, how we're going to address and some of these educating the parents and the children appropriately. I think I liked your idea of a video. I think getting people to understand why we're asking to do these things, right? Because it's about it's about keeping everybody safe, and so that we can potentially try to have some aspect of a functioning, right? Like, and we're trying to figure out how to do that. So I think also, at least wanting to express to the public that, there is no manual for this, like everybody's figuring out in the entire world. So, and we want to keep kids safe and we want to keep teachers safe. And the teacher safe thing is a big thing, because once your teachers get sick, you can't manufacture more teachers, like that isn't going to happen. And those are discussions later on about covering for teachers or even for proctors. That's real. I mean, we already have this really hard time, but you can't manufacture new teachers. And I know, because I made an option about how I'm going to teach at Colby, right? But everybody who is interfacing is trying to figure that out, because we just don't have the manpower to replicate all that. So kudos to you guys.
Thank you. I appreciate that, and we're just working through it. One of the other things I wanted to mention, and it seems my battery's going to die here, so I need a power source. I met on July 9th with our Kennebec Alliance Educational Resource Center partners, which includes John Moody of MSAD 54, superintendents I'm naming, RSU 18, Carl Gartley, Eric Haley of Waterville Schools, and Peter Tivitot of the Winslow School Department. And part of the function of the service center is that we regionalize, share resources, but we had met virtually with the Greater Kennebec Valley Superintendents Group before we went into this meeting. But we talked about some shared service opportunities, and among them is our capacity to offer courses or teachers in a remote environment, or address the staffing shortages that we know we are going to encounter that will result as a COVID-19 impact. And so kind of pooling our local resources and trying to prevent the disruption of education. And again, we can have even the funds for this. It's finding the personnel. So we're just in conversation about that, how that might work. And we share those resources in some manner, at least with RSU 18 with the virtual high school. But looking at that model and how we can help each other out, I think is important. And just the last thing I want to mention, this is like a combination of the superintendent's report. I guess I got ahead of the agenda here, but some good news. We were notified of the Mitchell Scholar recipient. And I'll just read a little bit out of from the Mitchell Institute. It marks the 25 years since Senator Mitchell established the Mitchell Scholarship Program, and excited to celebrate this milestone and new scholars with this announcement. And it is on their website, but this year we evaluated more than 1,400 applications, and the selection committee faced a great challenge in making its final decision. Each application was reviewed with great care through several rounds, and various factors were considered throughout the evaluation process. This year's Mitchell Scholars will receive a $10,000 scholarship that will be distributed in equal installments of $2,500 for each academic year at either a 2-year or 4-year degree program. The check will be sent to the college. But the 2020 Mitchell Scholar from Lawrence High School is Jacob Patterson. So congratulations to Jacob, and that is quite a prestigious award. So that concludes my report. Thank you. I'm going to go get a charger for this laptop.
Okay. So under new business, we have a couple of motions to take and vote to take regarding the computation of votes that I did. Just want to echo for any community members that are listening or will listen in the future, our thanks for the passage of the budget. That was a wonderful thing to see, a bit of a relief as we navigate through this process.
Jenny,
and
it seems to be your computer connection.
don't, you know,
Can you talk in
as
someone else's?
always don't know what's coming next. So we will stay on top of that. Are you still getting an echo? Wonderful. Sure.
Maybe you could run to my office. Okay, is that better? You could run to it.
I did unmute.
You have to crawl under the desk. It's coming up through the desk. And it's, yeah.
And now I can see myself on two screens.
Yeah, the toothy screen thing is kind of interesting.
I can't close my computer because I'm the host of the meeting. And if I close it, then you guys are all going to go away. Not my intent. But I hear the echo now too.
Roberta, can you mute your computer? Because that could be part of it.
And Jenny, you can just close your video and your microphone on your computer and use Danielle's.
Okay, wait. I have to mute her over here. Okay. So can you hear me now?
Yeah, it sounds good.
Okay. All right. So, as I was saying, we have a couple of votes related to the computation and the budget vote. Trying to sign in on my phone. You can just come. We can talk on the same computer.
Jenny, I would like to make a motion that the computation and declaration of vote dated July 16, 2020 and attached here to be approved, that the computation and declaration of votes be entered upon the records of Maine School Administrative District number 49, that a certified copy of the computation and declaration of votes be sent to each of the municipal clerks within the district, and that the foregoing computation and declaration shall be signed by a majority of the school board, and that these signatures may be made electronically by execution of counterparts or in person at the convenience of the members of the school board.
So moved.
Katrina said so moved.
Okay, Danielle moved. Katrina, do you second?
That was me, and yes, I second.
Thank you, Kara. Any discussion? Seeing none. Booton? Yes. Boyden? Yes. Davis Folsom?
Yes.
Hunt?
Yes.
Hussey? Yes.
Finley,
Yes.
Kugelmeyer,
For sure, yes.
Hashi,
Yes.
Lambert,
Yes.
White,
Yes.
Williams.
Yes.
Okay, the motion on the computation and declaration of vote is approved.
Jenny, I would like to make a motion to move that the warrant for assessment of tax and the assessment schedule and notice of installments for each member municipality prepared by the treasurer for fiscal year 2020, 2021 be approved and be issued in form presented to this meeting, and that the treasurer be authorized and directed to deliver to each member municipality its warrant for assessment of tax and its assessment schedule and notice of installments.
Second.
Okay, it has been moved by Danielle and seconded by Kara that the warrant assessment of tax and assessment schedule and notice of installments for each member municipality prepared by the treasurer for fiscal year 2020, 2021 be approved and be issued in form presented to this meeting.
Yes.
Dumont,
Yes.
Hussey.
Yes.
Kinley,
Yes.
Kugelmeyer,
Yes.
Hashi,
Yes.
Lambert,
Yes.
White,
Yes.
Williams.
Yes.
Motion for the warrant for assessment of tax and assessment schedule passes. This is the first one. Do we have any resignations or appointments? We do not. We do not. Okay. We do have an additional motion to go into a very brief executive session. So I would entertain a motion to go into executive session pursuant to 1 MRSA section 056F. So moved. So moved.
Second.
Been moved by Danielle and seconded by Heather to go into executive session. Booton. Yes. Boyden, yes. Davis Folsom.
Yes.
Dumont.
Yes.
Hussey.
Yes.
Kinley.
Yes.
Kugelmeyer.
Yes.
Lambert.
Yes.
White.
Yes.
Williams.
Yes.
Okay, we will go into executive session at 8:25.